A crash landing. The stars sparkled brightly in the endless void of space. Above a strange, uncharted planet, a sleek alien ship glided silently, cutting through the dark sky. Inside the ship, there was a calm atmosphere, but beneath it, a sense of nervous anticipation hung in the air. A young alien woman, Kayla, sat by the window, her eyes fixed on the vast expanse of space beyond. Beside her sat her daughter, Mira, a little girl with wide, curious eyes, staring at the stars as they passed by. Kayla, the mother, gently placed her hand on Mira's, offering comfort. It had been a long journey, and they were nearing their destination. They were traveling to a new world, a place where they could start over. Kayla had lost everything, the love of her life, her home, her people, but she had one thing left, her daughter. Mira was all that mattered now, and Kayla was determined to give her the best life she could. "Mom, will the new world be beautiful?" Mira asked, her voice full of wonder. Kayla smiled softly. "Yes, sweetie, it will be beautiful. We will make it beautiful together." As the ship flew closer to the planet, the engine suddenly gave a strange noise. Kayla's eyes widened as she turned to the control panel. Warning lights flashed, and alarms began to blare. Mira's smile quickly faded, replaced by concern. "Mom, what's happening?" Mira asked, her voice trembling slightly. Kayla quickly adjusted the controls, trying to stabilize the ship. She wasn't an expert pilot, but she had learned enough to manage. Something was wrong, very wrong. The ship started shaking, and the view outside the window turned into a blur of colors as the planet's gravity began to pull them in. "Hold on, Mira," Kayla shouted, her heart racing. She gripped the controls tightly, her knuckles turning white. The ship lurched again, this time more violently, and the sky outside seemed to spin in all directions. The roar of the engine grew louder, and Kayla could feel her pulse quickening. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the ship, followed by a loud, hollow thud. The ship's lights flickered, and the alarm blared even louder. Kayla felt a cold sweat form on her brow. She couldn't control the ship anymore. The panic in her chest began to rise, but she fought it down. She had to stay calm. For Mira. "Mira, brace yourself," she yelled, grabbing her daughter and pulling her into her arms. "We're going down." The ship continued to shake, spiraling out of control as they plummeted toward the planet below. Mira clung to her mother, her small body trembling. The cold fear in her eyes mirrored Kayla's own, but Kayla tried to shield her from the worst of it. She couldn't lose her daughter, not like this. The crash was inevitable. With a deafening crash, the ship hit the ground with a violent jolt. Kayla was thrown forward, her body slamming into the seat in front of her. Mira cried out in pain as the impact rattled them both. Everything went dark. When Kayla regained consciousness, her head was pounding. She blinked against the bright light streaming through a crack in the ship's metal hull. The ground beneath her was hard and uneven. Slowly, she pushed herself up, groaning as she touched her head. Blood trickled down from a cut above her brow. She felt disoriented, but she couldn't afford to stay down. Mira. She needed to find Mira. "Sweetie?" "Mira." Kayla called out, her voice hoarse and weak. She crawled over the wreckage, her limbs heavy and slow. It felt as if the whole world was spinning. Mira's small voice answered from behind a pile of debris. "Mom, I'm scared." Kayla's heart surged with relief. "Mira, stay right there. I'm coming." She crawled over the wreckage, moving quickly despite the pain in her body. Finally, she reached Mira, who was trapped beneath a broken beam. Kayla pulled the beam aside with all her strength, her muscles burning. Her daughter's face was streaked with dirt, but her wide eyes looked up at her with a mixture of fear and trust. "Are you okay, sweetie?" Kayla asked, her voice trembling. Mira nodded, though she was clearly frightened. "I think so. My arm hurts a little." Kayla carefully examined her daughter's arm. It was bruised, but nothing seemed broken. A wave of relief washed over Kayla. They were alive, both of them. For now, that was enough. Kayla helped Mira to her feet, her own legs shaking with effort. They stood together, looking around at the wreckage of their ship. It was a disaster. The ship was twisted and torn. The outer walls caved in on themselves. The wreckage stretched for miles, and the landscape around them was unlike anything Kayla had ever seen. The ground was covered in thick, lush vegetation. Strange, towering trees loomed over them, their trunks twisted in odd shapes. The air was heavy with humidity, and the distant sounds of strange creatures echoed in the background. It was like nothing Kayla had ever imagined. It was both beautiful and terrifying. "We're not on our home planet anymore," Kayla whispered, her voice filled with both awe and fear. They had crash-landed on an alien world, a place neither of them knew. "We need to find shelter," Kayla said, trying to stay focused. "We need to stay safe until we figure out what to do." Mira nodded, clinging to her mother's side. They didn't have a choice. They were stranded, with no way to communicate, no way to call for help. It was just the two of them now, alone on an unknown planet. Kayla's heart ached, but she refused to let fear control her. She would protect her daughter, no matter what. With determination, they took their first steps into the unknown. The journey had only just begun, and Kayla knew it wouldn't be easy. But with Mira by her side, she would face whatever dangers lay ahead. Together, they would survive. The island's secrets. Kayla and Mira stood in stunned silence, gazing at the wreckage of their ship, which now lay in ruins behind them. The forest around them was eerily quiet, a heavy stillness that seemed to press down on them. Kayla took a deep breath, trying to shake off the shock of the crash. They were alive, but they were also stranded on an alien world, with no way to communicate or call for help. With Mira clinging to her side, Kayla scanned the surroundings. The towering trees with their twisted trunks seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky. Large, strange flowers bloomed in vivid colors, their petals unfurling like something out of a dream. The air was thick with moisture, and the scent of unfamiliar plants filled her nostrils. This world, so beautiful and vibrant, was also wild, untamed, and full of unknown dangers. "We need to find shelter," Kayla said, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her insides. She didn't want to scare Mira, but they couldn't stay near the wreckage for long. It was too exposed. Mira nodded, though her eyes were wide with wonder and fear. "Where should we go?" Kayla glanced around, trying to get her bearings. The ship's wreckage was situated near the edge of a dense jungle. Beyond it, a mountain range loomed in the distance, its peaks hidden in thick clouds. There was no telling what lay beyond the forest, or how far the mountains stretched. But Kayla knew they needed to move. Every instinct told her that staying in one place was dangerous. "Let's head toward the forest," Kayla decided. "It might offer us some cover. We'll figure out what to do from there." Together, they started walking through the thick undergrowth, their steps slow and careful. The jungle was alive with sounds, chirping insects, distant rustling, and the occasional call of what Kayla could only guess were animals. Mira's small hand wrapped around her mother's, but Kayla noticed her daughter's gaze darting nervously from one shadow to another. Every crack of a branch or rustle in the bushes made her flinch. Kayla kept her eyes sharp, alert for any signs of danger. They hadn't seen any life forms yet, but she knew better than to assume they were alone. The silence of the jungle felt unnerving, as though the whole world was holding its breath. Kayla's thoughts wandered to the crash, how the ship had broken apart so suddenly, the terrifying descent, the deafening crash that followed. She shook her head, trying to focus on the present. There was no time for thinking about the past right now. "We need to find food and water," Kayla murmured to herself, her mind running through the basics of survival. The crash had left them with only the clothes on their backs and a few small items that Kayla had managed to salvage from the wreckage. There was no telling how long they'd be stranded here, so she needed to find a way to provide for Mira. After a few hours of trekking through the jungle, they came across a small stream that ran through the thick vegetation. The water was clear, and Kayla didn't hesitate. She knelt down and cupped her hands, drinking greedily from the stream. Mira followed her, taking small sips as Kayla scanned the area. "This is good," Kayla said, looking around. "We can stay here for a while." But something about the place felt off. It wasn't the water or the landscape, it was the feeling in the air. The weight of it, as if something was watching them. Kayla couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Her eyes darted around, scanning the trees and the underbrush. But everything seemed normal, at least at first glance. Yet the feeling lingered, growing stronger with every passing minute. It was as if the very land itself was hiding something. Kayla didn't know what it was, but she felt it deep in her bones, a strange, unsettling presence that seemed to shadow their every move. Mira tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, what's wrong? Why do you look so scared?" Kayla forced a smile, masking her unease. "It's nothing, sweetie. We just need to stay alert, okay?" Mira nodded, though she didn't seem entirely convinced. Kayla stood, brushing herself off. "Let's keep moving. We can't stay here too long." They walked for hours, pushing deeper into the jungle. The landscape began to change. The trees grew taller, their trunks broader, and the air grew thicker with the scent of strange, exotic flowers. The jungle seemed to close in around them, the path narrowing as if the land itself was pushing them forward. Eventually, they reached a clearing. At the center of the clearing stood a massive stone structure, half covered by vines and moss. It was ancient, unlike anything Kayla had ever seen. The stones were carved with intricate symbols, worn and faded by time, yet still unmistakably foreign. A chill ran down Kayla's spine as she approached the structure, her footsteps hesitant. "What is this?" Mira asked, her voice filled with awe. "I don't know," Kayla admitted, "but it's not a natural formation. Someone, or something, built this." The sight of the ruins only deepened the mystery of the island. Who had built this? And why? The place felt ancient, but Kayla couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't abandoned. Something, or someone, was still here, watching them. As they explored the ruins, they found more strange symbols carved into the stone walls. Some of the symbols were familiar to Kayla from ancient texts she had studied as a child, but many of them were entirely new, their meanings lost to time. Suddenly, Kayla froze. A sound echoed from deeper within the ruins, a low, humming noise, almost like a pulse. It seemed to vibrate through the ground, sending a shiver up her spine. Mira's grip on her hand tightened. "Mom, what was that?" Mira whispered, her voice trembling. Kayla didn't answer. Her heart was racing. She knew they needed to leave, but some deep, instinctual part of her, urged her to stay. There was something important here, something she had to find. Before Kayla could say anything, a shadow moved across the entrance to the structure. A figure appeared in the doorway, barely visible at first. Kayla's breath caught in her throat. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her feet were rooted to the ground. She could only stare as the figure stepped into the light, revealing a tall, humanoid shape, its features hidden beneath a cloak of shadows. The figure's eyes gleamed in the dim light, and Kayla's blood ran cold. They were not alone. The first encounter. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dense jungle. Kayla and Mira had been walking for hours, their exhaustion starting to show. The jungle was relentless, and the deeper they ventured, the stranger the environment seemed to become. The air was thick with humidity, the insects louder, the plants more bizarre and otherworldly. They needed rest, but the eerie feeling that had followed them since their arrival still clung to the air like a heavy fog. Kayla's instincts told her they were getting closer to something that didn't want them here. "We need to find shelter for the night," Kayla said, her voice low and cautious. Her eyes scanned the area, searching for a safe place to settle. The last thing they needed was to be caught outside when the dangers of the island were most active. The night had a strange quality to it, as if the shadows held secrets too dark to understand. Mira nodded, her small hand gripping her mother's as they moved forward, trying to stay close to the sparse cover the trees provided. Despite the fatigue, Kayla remained vigilant. The mysterious stone structure that they had discovered earlier was still on her mind, the humming sound they had heard reverberating in her thoughts. What was it, and why did it feel like someone, or something, was watching them? Suddenly, Mira stopped walking. Her wide eyes darted toward a patch of thick brush just off the path. "Mom, I saw something." Kayla tensed, her heart leaping in her chest. She hadn't seen anything, but Mira's intuition was usually spot on. "Stay close to me," Kayla whispered, pulling Mira behind her as they slowly approached the area. The hairs on the back of Kayla's neck stood up, her senses on high alert. The rustling from the brush grew louder, more deliberate. Kayla's hand hovered near the small blade she had taken from the wreckage. She wasn't sure if it was enough to protect them, but she wasn't about to take any chances. Every instinct in her body told her something was coming, something she didn't understand. Then, out of the bushes, a figure emerged. Kayla froze. The figure was humanoid in shape, but its movements were unnaturally smooth. It wasn't like a human or even one of the alien species Kayla was familiar with. The creature's skin was a pale, almost translucent gray, and its eyes were black, void-like, and piercing. Its features were sharp, its body covered in a sleek, dark suit that seemed to shimmer in the fading light, as if made from the very shadows around them. It was as if the creature had stepped out of the night itself, blending perfectly with the surrounding darkness. "Who are you?" Kayla demanded, trying to keep her voice steady, even though her heart was racing. Mira squeezed her hand harder, her face pressed against her mother's side, her breath shallow with fear. The creature tilted its head slightly, studying them with an intensity that sent a chill down Kayla's spine. It didn't speak at first, just stood there, silent and unblinking. Kayla's mind raced. Was it hostile? Was it a threat? Finally, the creature spoke. Its voice was smooth, almost melodic, but there was a coldness to it that made Kayla's blood run colder. "I am not here to harm you," it said, its voice resonating through the still air. "But you are trespassing." Kayla's grip on her daughter tightened, and she stepped forward, blocking Mira from the creature's gaze. "What do you mean? Where are we? What is this place?" The creature's eyes flickered over her briefly, then moved to the jungle around them. "This is a world lost to time," it said, almost as if to itself. "A place where the past and future collide. You should not be here. Your kind has no place on this island." Kayla's confusion deepened. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice growing more urgent. "We crashed here by accident. We didn't mean to." The creature raised a hand, silencing her. "I know why you are here," it said, its eyes narrowing. "But it matters not. You will not leave. Not unless you understand what this island truly is." Kayla's heart raced. This was no ordinary alien. This was something far older, something with knowledge of the island's secrets. She didn't know whether to run or stand her ground. If it had been any other creature, she might have attacked. But something told her that this being held more power than she could imagine. "What do you want?" Kayla asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her mind was racing, trying to figure out how to protect her daughter, how to protect them both. The creature's eyes locked onto hers. "What I want is irrelevant," it replied, its tone suddenly dark and menacing. "But if you wish to leave this place, you must first survive what awaits you. The island has a way of testing those who step foot on it. It will not be kind." Kayla felt her heart sink. The words were like a weight pressing down on her chest. She had suspected it. The island was alive, in some way. And whatever this creature was, it was connected to the island. It was part of its ancient, hidden power. The figure took a step closer, its movements unnervingly graceful. Your only choice is to face the trials of the island. It continued, or be consumed by its hunger. Before Kayla could react, the creature turned and disappeared into the jungle, vanishing as silently as it had appeared. For a long moment, Kayla stood frozen, her mind reeling. Mira tugged at her hand, breaking the spell. "Mom, what do we do now?" Mira's voice was small, but Kayla could hear the fear in it. Kayla took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "We survive. We have no choice now. We need to understand this place, learn its secrets, and find a way to make it out alive." Her heart was still pounding, but she knew one thing for sure. Their journey had just become much more complicated. The creature's warning echoed in her mind. The island was no simple wilderness. It was a place of tests, trials, and dangers beyond anything they had ever faced. But Kayla refused to let fear take hold. She would protect her daughter, no matter what it took. And she would uncover the truth about this island. A ray of hope. The night crept in quickly, shrouding the jungle in an eerie darkness that seemed to press in on Kayla and Mira from all sides. The encounter with the mysterious creature still lingered in Kayla's mind, each word of its cryptic warning echoing like a distant drumbeat. It had told them they could leave the island, but only if they faced the trials it held. And while the creature had promised no harm, Kayla couldn't shake the feeling that they had entered a realm where the rules of survival were not what they knew. As the two of them sat by the small fire they had managed to light, the crackling of the flames was the only sound in the otherwise oppressive silence. Mira clung to her mother's side, her small body trembling slightly. Though the fire gave them warmth, it didn't offer much comfort in a world so full of unknowns. Kayla's eyes flickered to the dark horizon. The jungle around them was a maze of shadows, every movement in the distance sending her pulse racing. But she had to focus. She couldn't afford to let fear take over, not when Mira was depending on her. "Mom, what was that thing?" Mira asked quietly, her voice filled with the kind of curiosity that only a child could have in such a terrifying moment. Her eyes were wide with wonder, but Kayla could see the faint traces of fear that lingered beneath her calm exterior. Kayla swallowed hard, trying to steady herself before answering. "I'm not sure, sweetie, but we have to be careful. That thing, it wasn't like anything I've seen before. It knows this island, and it wants us to leave. It says we have to survive the trials." Mira's face scrunched in confusion. "Trials? What does that mean?" Kayla didn't have an answer. She had no idea what these so-called trials were, or what kind of dangers they would face. But she wasn't about to let her daughter see the fear that stirred inside her. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "We don't need to worry about that right now. What we need to focus on is finding a safe place to rest, and making sure we're ready for whatever comes next." Mira nodded, though her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. Kayla could feel the weight of her own doubt pressing against her chest, but she pushed it aside. The only thing that mattered was keeping her daughter safe and finding a way out of this nightmare. Just as the fire began to flicker, a rustling noise broke the silence, coming from the edge of the clearing. Kayla stiffened, her hand instinctively moving to the small blade she carried. Mira looked up at her mother, her expression confused and fearful. "Mom, what is that?" she whispered. Kayla's heart raced. The jungle had been so still moments before, but now someone, was moving in the dark. Was it the creature again? Had it returned to finish what it had started? But then, through the darkness, a figure stepped forward. It wasn't the strange creature from earlier. Instead, it was a human. A man, tall and lean, with dark, shaggy hair and eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. He wore a rugged, worn-out suit, and his movements were slow and deliberate, as though he had been living in the wilderness for a long time. Kayla stood up, instinctively stepping in front of Mira, her protective instincts kicking in. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the sudden surge of panic in her chest. The man raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you. he said in a gravelly voice, his accent foreign but familiar. "I've been stranded here for years. You're not the first ones to crash on this island." Kayla's mind raced as she processed his words. "Stranded here," she repeated, her voice shaking. "For years? How long have you been here?" The man's eyes flickered with a mix of sadness and regret. "Too long," he replied, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I crash-landed here on a ship much like yours. I tried to find a way off this island, but it's not as simple as it seems. The island doesn't let you leave unless it's ready for you to go." Kayla felt a wave of unease wash over her. "What do you mean? The island doesn't let you leave?" The man's eyes met hers again, and there was a strange intensity in them, as if he was trying to decide whether to trust her. "There's something on this island," he said quietly, "something older than anything we've ever known. It tests everyone who lands here. And the trials, they're not what you think. You'll have to face them if you want to survive." Kayla swallowed, her mind racing. What kind of trials? What are we supposed to do? The man looked down at the ground, as if weighing his words. "I can show you," he said after a long pause. "I've learned to survive here, to understand the island. There's a place not far from here, a place where the island's secrets are hidden. If you want to leave, you'll need to reach it." Kayla exchanged a glance with Mira. She was hesitant, unsure whether to trust this stranger. But they had no other options. They couldn't stay in the jungle forever, and the man seemed to know more about the island than they did. Perhaps he was their only chance at survival. "We'll go with you," Kayla said, her voice firm, though doubt still lingered in her heart. "But if you try anything..." The man raised his hands again. "I swear, I'm not your enemy. I just want to help you get out of here." Kayla didn't fully trust him, but she had no choice. They needed to take risks if they were going to survive. "Lead the way." With that, the man turned and began walking into the jungle, his steps steady and sure. Kayla and Mira followed closely behind, the firelight fading behind them as they ventured deeper into the unknown. As they walked, Kayla couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn into something far larger and more dangerous than they could comprehend. The island was alive with secrets, and the man seemed to know more than he was letting on. But for now, he was their guide, and perhaps their only hope. The plan to escape. The dense jungle wrapped around them like a maze, the thick foliage blocking out what little light remained from the setting sun. The air grew heavier, thick with humidity, and the distant hum of unseen creatures. Kayla, Mira, and the mysterious stranger, who introduced himself as Ryan, had been walking for hours, with no sign of civilization or escape in sight. The path through the jungle was treacherous, the ground uneven and slippery, as if the very earth was trying to slow them down. But Ryan seemed unaffected by the challenging terrain. He moved swiftly, almost as if he had memorized the jungle's secrets, while Kayla struggled to keep pace. Mira had grown quiet, her small hand tightly gripping Kayla's, her face pale with exhaustion. The journey had been long, and they were no closer to finding the answers they needed. Kayla's mind was filled with questions. What was the island hiding? What were these trials Ryan had mentioned? And most importantly, how would they escape this nightmare? After what felt like an eternity, Ryan stopped at the edge of a clearing, motioning for them to do the same. Kayla's eyes scanned the area, immediately on high alert. The clearing seemed almost too perfect, with tall grasses gently swaying in the breeze and a cluster of strange, towering rocks in the center, arranged in a way that felt unnatural. There was something about this place that didn't sit right with her. "This is it," Ryan said quietly, his voice low, as if afraid to disturb the peace of the place. "We're close." "Close to what?" Kayla asked, her voice full of suspicion. She couldn't help but feel that they were walking straight into a trap. She couldn't trust Ryan completely. Not yet. She needed answers before she could allow herself to relax. Ryan turned to face her, his expression serious. "The trials. The island's tests. This place is the first step." Kayla frowned. And what exactly do we have to do? Ryan looked at the rocks, then back at Kayla. There's a pattern to the island, a way it tests those who land here. We need to go through the trials to prove we can survive. If we pass, the island will let us go. But if we fail, Kayla felt a chill run down her spine. If we fail, what happens? Ryan hesitated for a moment before speaking. The island doesn't kill directly. It breaks you. Mentally, emotionally. It makes you lose yourself, piece by piece, until you can't go on anymore. Kayla swallowed hard, trying to push the fear down. She wasn't going to let that happen. Not to her, and not to Mira. How do we pass these trials? Kayla asked, trying to sound calm, though her heart was pounding. Ryan looked toward the center of the clearing, where the rocks formed a rough circle. The trials are different for everyone. They draw on your fears, your weaknesses, but you must face them. Only then will the island allow you to leave. Kayla's gaze shifted to Mira, who was still holding her hand tightly. The little girl's face was pale, her expression one of quiet fear. She had been through so much already. Kayla couldn't bear the thought of exposing her to more danger. We need to stick together, Kayla said firmly. No matter what happens, Mira and I will face this together. We won't let anything break us. Ryan nodded solemnly. That's the only way to survive. He motioned for them to follow him toward the stone circle. As they approached, the air seemed to grow thicker, heavier with anticipation. The stones, weathered by time and hidden by the overgrowth, glowed faintly in the dimming light. There was an otherworldly energy emanating from them, a hum that seemed to vibrate through Kayla's chest. Stand here, Ryan instructed, stepping into the circle of stones. He motioned for Kayla and Mira to follow. This is the beginning. Once you step inside, the trials will begin. There's no turning back. Kayla hesitated for a moment, her protective instincts screaming at her to keep Mira safe, to shield her from whatever lay ahead. But there was no choice. They had to face whatever the island had in store for them, or they would never leave. With a deep breath, Kayla took Mira's hand and stepped into the circle, her heart pounding in her chest. As soon as they crossed the threshold, the world around them seemed to change. The ground beneath their feet felt different, firmer, colder, as though the very earth was reacting to their presence. The air became still, and the noise of the jungle faded, replaced by an eerie silence. Suddenly, the stones seemed to glow brighter, casting a dim, otherworldly light across the clearing. Kayla felt a jolt of energy surge through her, as though she had just been plugged into something far beyond her understanding. The world around them seemed to warp, and for a moment, she lost her sense of time and space. Stay close, Mira, Kayla whispered, her voice steady despite the rising panic inside her. She could feel the presence of the island, the ancient power that lay beneath it, all around them. Without warning, the silence was broken. A voice echoed in Kayla's mind, deep and resonant, as though it was coming from all directions. Welcome, Kayla. Welcome, Mira. You have entered the trials of the island. Only those who prove themselves worthy will survive. The first trial will begin now. Kayla's breath hitched. She felt the weight of the voice in her bones, as though it was part of the very air she breathed. The trial was starting, and there was no turning back. The ground beneath her feet trembled slightly, and the stones around them seemed to shift. The clearing began to change, transforming into a landscape that felt oddly familiar and deeply unsettling. The jungle faded away, replaced by a barren desert, the heat radiating from the ground like an inferno. In the distance, Kayla saw something that made her heart drop. A figure, standing alone in the desert. It was a man, a tall figure with features she recognized immediately. Her husband, Narek. His face, once full of life and love, was now twisted with pain and despair. Narek, Kayla whispered, her voice cracking. The figure didn't move, just stood there, his expression hollow. The desert around them seemed to stretch endlessly, the horizon blurred by the heat. Mom, Mira whispered, her voice small. What's happening? Kayla took a step forward, her heart aching. It's okay, sweetie. It's not real. It can't be. But as she moved closer, the figure of Narek grew more distinct, his eyes meeting hers with a look that sent a cold shiver through her. He wasn't just standing there. He was calling to her, his mouth moving silently, beckoning her to come closer. Kayla's mind raced. This was the first trial, wasn't it? The island was testing her. The desert, Narek, wasn't real. But the pain in her chest, the longing to be with him again, felt all too real. Could she resist? Could she leave him behind? The voice in her mind returned, echoing in her head. You must face your greatest fear. Will you choose to stay in the past, or will you move forward? The choice is yours. Kayla's pulse raced as she reached out, her hand trembling. Would she give in to the past, to the memory of her lost love, or would she let it go and continue forward with her daughter? With a deep breath, she stepped back. I'm not staying in the past, Kayla whispered. I'm moving forward. The desert and the figure of Narek vanished instantly, leaving her in the clearing once more. Mira was still beside her, her eyes wide with fear and confusion, but Kayla squeezed her hand gently. We're still here, Mira. We're okay. The voice spoke again, softer this time. You have passed the first trial, but many more await you. Kayla exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. But she knew this was just the beginning. Whatever lay ahead, she had to face it, for herself and for Mira. Together, they would survive. The final showdown. The jungle around Kayla and Mira seemed to hold its breath, as if the island itself was watching, waiting. After the harrowing experience of the first trial, Kayla thought she might feel relief, but the weight of the island's presence still loomed over them. The ground beneath their feet felt unstable, as though it could shift at any moment. Every rustle of the trees, every distant cry from the creatures hidden in the shadows, kept Kayla's senses on edge. Ryan had led them further into the jungle after the trial, his face grim, but he hadn't said much. He knew the island's dangers, and Kayla could see the lines of exhaustion and fear etched into his features. They had barely had time to process the first trial before they were plunged into the next phase of their ordeal. But one thing was certain now: whatever this island was, it was alive, and it was testing them in ways they could not yet comprehend. The trials had begun in earnest, and it was only going to get harder. We need to find shelter, Kayla muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. It had been hours since the first trial, and she could feel the strain in her muscles, the exhaustion in her bones. But there was no time to rest. She had seen what the island could do to someone who wasn't prepared. Mira was quieter now, no longer asking questions or clinging to her mother's side. She was afraid. Kayla could see it in the way she moved. The little girl's eyes darted nervously, her face pale, and Kayla could feel her own heart twist. This was not the world her daughter should be in. But they were stuck here. And no matter how terrifying it was, Kayla had to find a way to protect her. They came across a clearing, much like the one where the first trial had taken place. But this time, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The trees seemed to grow closer together, the path narrowing. There was something unnatural about this place, an oppressive weight in the air that pressed down on them, making it hard to breathe. Without warning, Ryan stopped, his body rigid as he turned to face them. His eyes were wide, his face pale. "It's here," he whispered. Kayla's heart skipped a beat. "What's here?" Ryan's eyes flickered to the dense underbrush at the edge of the clearing, and Kayla followed his gaze. There, emerging from the shadows, was a creature unlike anything Kayla had ever seen before. It was enormous, its body covered in thick, armored plates that gleamed like obsidian in the dim light. Its eyes were red, glowing with a malevolent hunger. The air seemed to vibrate with its presence, and Kayla felt a chill run down her spine. This was no mere predator. This was something far more dangerous. The creature stepped forward, its massive legs thundering against the ground. Its claws scraped against the earth, sending a sharp, echoing noise through the clearing. Kayla's breath caught in her throat. There was no escape now. This wasn't just a test of survival. It was a test of their strength, of their will to fight. "We need to move," Kayla said, her voice tight. She could feel the weight of Ryan's gaze on her, but she didn't need to look at him to know he was terrified. They all were. This was not something that could be outrun. The island's trials were not only tests of the mind. They were tests of survival, and this was the trial they would have to face head-on. Before Kayla could make a move, the creature lunged. Its claws slashed through the air, so fast and powerful that Kayla barely had time to react. She grabbed Mira, pulling her to the ground just in time to avoid the deadly swipe. The force of the creature's strike sent shockwaves through the air, and Kayla could feel the earth tremble beneath her. Ryan reacted instantly, drawing a weapon from his side, a long, jagged blade that seemed to hum with a strange energy. He darted forward, attacking the creature with fierce precision, but it was like trying to cut through steel. The blade barely made a dent in the creature's thick armor. "We can't kill it like this," Kayla shouted. Her heart raced as she looked around for anything they could use to their advantage. There had to be something in this jungle that could help them, something the creature wasn't prepared for. Mira's frightened voice cut through the chaos. "Mom, what are we going to do?" Kayla's mind raced. She had to think fast. She had no choice but to fight back. "Stay down, Mira. Don't look. Just stay down." The creature swung its massive tail, knocking Ryan off his feet and sending him crashing into the trees. The sound of bones snapping echoed through the clearing, and Kayla felt her stomach lurch. He was down. For a moment, Kayla's mind reeled, but then she snapped back to reality. She couldn't afford to lose focus. Her eyes scanned the environment, and that's when she saw it. High above them, a thick vine wrapped around a tree. It was strong enough to support their weight, and it might be their only chance to escape the creature's wrath. "Ran," she called out, her voice sharp with urgency. "We need to climb, get to the vines." Ryan, battered and bleeding, struggled to his feet, his eyes wild with desperation. He nodded, gritting his teeth. "Go, I'll cover you." Kayla didn't hesitate. She grabbed Mira's hand and ran toward the tree, pulling her daughter up toward the vine. The creature roared behind them, its claws scraping against the earth. But Kayla focused on one thing: the vine. They had to reach it, or they would die. With one final push, Kayla managed to get herself and Mira onto the thick vine. They swung into the trees, the creature snapping at them below, its jaws clashing together with an ear-splitting sound. Kayla's heart raced as they swung higher, but the creature wasn't giving up. It charged after them, its fury increasing with every passing second. "Hold on tight," Kayla shouted as she propelled them higher into the canopy. The world blurred as they moved, the jungle flying by in a dizzying rush. They had to get far enough away, far enough that the creature couldn't reach them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Kayla and Mira reached a high branch, the vine finally coming to an end. They collapsed onto the branch, panting heavily, their bodies shaking with fear and exhaustion. Below them, the creature circled, its glowing eyes searching for them in the shadows. It was still there, still hunting them. "We can't stay here forever," Kayla whispered, her voice trembling. Mira clung to her mother, her small body trembling with fear. "What do we do now, Mom?" Kayla took a deep breath. "We keep moving. We find a way to finish this trial, and we don't stop until we're free." The creature below them snarled, but it didn't seem to have the strength to climb after them. For now, they were safe. But Kayla knew the final showdown had only just begun. This was just the first step in their battle to survive the island. A new beginning. The jungle was eerily silent as Kayla, Mira, and Ryan crouched on a high branch, their bodies tense, waiting for the creature to retreat. It had been a long battle, one that had left them battered and exhausted. but it hadn't been in vain. With the creature temporarily defeated, Kayla allowed herself a moment of respite, but only a moment. The trials weren't over yet, and the island had shown them that it would never be easy. "Are you okay?" Kayla asked, her voice filled with concern as she checked on Mira. The little girl was clinging to her side, her face pale and wide-eyed from the terror they had just faced. The trauma of the encounter had shaken her, but she had remained strong. Kayla was proud of her, but she knew the worst wasn't over. Mira nodded, her small fingers tightening around her mother's hand. "I'm okay, Mom. Just scared." Kayla pulled her closer, wrapping her arm around her daughter's trembling shoulders. "I know, sweetie. I know." She looked down at the creature below, still circling the base of the tree. It was no longer a direct threat, but Kayla couldn't ignore the fact that they couldn't stay there forever. It would be back. The island's trials were relentless, and she knew that as soon as one danger was faced, another would rise to take its place. Ryan, still bleeding from his earlier injuries, leaned against the trunk of the tree, his eyes fixed on the horizon. His expression was grim, his lips pressed tightly together. "We need to move," he said, his voice rough. "The island won't wait for us to rest." Kayla nodded, her gaze hardening. "You're right. We're not safe here, but we can't keep running. We need to find the heart of the island. The place where the trials end." "Where is that?" Ryan asked, looking at her in confusion. "I don't know yet," Kayla admitted, "but we'll figure it out. The island is testing us. But if we keep pushing forward, we'll find what we need. We can't stop." With the last of their strength, they made their way down from the tree, moving through the jungle with cautious determination. The oppressive silence that had fallen over the land felt unnerving, as though the island was watching, waiting for them to slip up. Every rustle of the leaves, every step they took, felt heavy with the knowledge that the trials had only just begun. As they walked, Kayla couldn't help but think back to the creature they had just faced. It was unlike anything she had ever encountered, its presence a dark reminder of how much she still had to learn about the island. But what terrified her most was the knowledge that the trials weren't just about survival. They were about something deeper, something the island was trying to force them to confront. The island wasn't just testing their strength or courage. It was testing their will to live, to move forward in the face of overwhelming loss and pain. "Do you think we can really leave this place?" Mira asked, her voice soft, as though afraid to speak the words aloud. Kayla glanced down at her daughter, her heart heavy. "I don't know, sweetie, but we have to try. We're not just going to give up." They walked for hours, the dense jungle giving way to a thick, mist-covered swamp. The air was thick and damp, making it harder to breathe with every step they took. Kayla's mind raced as she searched for any sign that they were on the right path. The island was testing them in ways that felt impossible, but she couldn't let it defeat them. Not when Mira was depending on her. Ryan, despite his injuries, pressed on without complaint. His silence spoke volumes, his face etched with a deep sadness that Kayla couldn't ignore. He had been here for far longer than she had, and it was clear that the island had broken him in ways he wasn't willing to admit. But he hadn't given up. None of them had. As they reached the heart of the swamp, something shifted in the air. The mist parted, revealing a clearing up ahead. At its center stood a massive stone structure, unlike anything Kayla had ever seen. It was ancient, covered in moss and vines, but it radiated an undeniable energy, a pulse that seemed to beat with the heart of the island itself. "Is this it?" Ryan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Kayla stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "I think so." The stone structure was more than just a building. It was a monument, a gateway to something far older than the island itself. The air around it hummed with power, and Kayla could feel the ground beneath her feet tremble with the energy that radiated from the stones. As they approached, the stone doors of the structure slowly creaked open, as though the island itself was inviting them in. Kayla hesitated for a moment, her instincts screaming to be cautious, but she pushed them aside. They had come this far, and they had no choice but to continue. The inside of the structure was dimly lit by a strange, otherworldly glow that seemed to emanate from the walls. The air was thick with the scent of ancient earth, and Kayla could feel a strange pull guiding them deeper into the heart of the building. The stone walls were etched with symbols, some familiar, some foreign, but all of them held a significance she couldn't yet understand. Ryan stepped forward, his eyes scanning the walls. "This is where the trials end," he said softly. "This is the heart of the island. If you can face what's inside, you'll be free." Kayla's breath caught in her throat. "What's inside?" Ryan turned to her, his expression unreadable. "It's not what you think. It's not just the island you need to face. It's yourself." The word struck Kayla like a bolt of lightning. She had known, deep down, that the island's trials were about more than just survival. They were about confronting the parts of herself she had buried deep within, her guilt, her grief, her fear. And now she had no choice but to face them. "Let's go," Kayla said, her voice firm. She took Mira's hand and stepped forward, feeling the weight of the island's power pressing down on her shoulders. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it. The doors closed behind them with a deafening slam, sealing them inside. For a moment, the world was still, silent, as though the island itself had taken a breath, waiting for them to make their move. Suddenly, the air around them began to shimmer, and the ground beneath their feet shifted. Kayla's vision blurred, and a familiar scene began to form around them. A memory, one she hadn't thought about in years. She saw Narek again, standing before her, his smile warm, his eyes full of love. But this time, he wasn't the man she remembered. This time, he was angry, accusing her of abandoning him, of failing him. The vision shifted, and Kayla saw herself, alone and broken, in the ruins of her past. She saw herself running, always running, unable to stop the flood of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. She saw her guilt, her grief, her fear of losing everything. And she realized something that shook her to her core. She had been running from herself this whole time. With a deep breath, Kayla stepped forward, confronting the vision of Narek. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I couldn't save you, but I'm not running anymore. I'm here. I'm ready to face this." The vision of Narek faded, and the glowing energy around her began to shift. The stone structure rumbled, and a deep, resonant voice echoed in her mind. "You have passed the trials. The island has tested your heart, your will, your spirit. You are free." The mist parted, revealing the jungle once again, but this time, it was different. The oppressive weight had lifted, and the path before them was clear. They had made it. Kayla had faced her past, her fears and her loss, and she had emerged stronger. The island, in all its mystery, had no more power over her. "We're free," Kayla whispered, looking down at Mira, who was gazing up at her with wide, hopeful eyes. "Yes," Kayla said softly, a smile breaking through the exhaustion. "We're free, and we're going home."